In the forests of Oregon during the early 1990s, a retired veterinarian named Ruth Calder lives alone in a quiet cabin by a creek, mourning the son she lost to the mountains. Her days pass in silence until one cold morning she hears a soft scraping at her wooden door. What she finds there is not quite human, not quite animal. A small, trembling creature, soaked in rain, with amber eyes full of fear, and something more, something like hope. She doesn't know what it is or where it came from, but she offers it a bowl of food, a place to rest, and something it has never known: kindness. From that moment on, a bond begins to grow between a woman who's lost everything and a visitor from the forest, learning what it means to be safe and seen. As seasons pass, Ruth and the creature, whom she names Harbor, begin to teach each other how to live again. But when fear from the outside world threatens to tear them apart, the forest must decide what to protect, and Ruth must show the world what it truly means to be human. Based on a true local legend whispered in the Umpqua woods, this is not just a story about a creature in the wild. It's about how we heal, how we love, and how sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest truths. Where are you watching from? And how far can this story travel? If it found you, maybe it was meant to. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being here. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite so much as it settled. October 1992 in the Umpqua forest meant mist curled like breath held too long, and every board in the porch groaned like it remembered better days. The roof above Ruth Calder's cabin dripped steady with last night's rain, but she didn't mind the sound. It was one of the few rhythms left that didn't hurt to listen to. She sat on the porch swing before the sky shifted, wrapped in a wool blanket older than most of the trees out back. Her coffee had gone lukewarm in the chipped blue mug beside her. The forest was holding its breath, the way it does just before dawn, and Ruth, 58, wrapped in her own kind of silence, waited for the light to come up slow over the ridge. She'd been up since 3, sleep chased off again by dreams she didn't want to name. The kind that brought her hands to her chest in the dark, like something had been ripped away and almost stitched back, crooked and tender. That was when she heard it. Not loud, not urgent, but different. A soft, dragging sound, like someone pulling a wet rope across wood grain. Not a knock. Not the familiar scrabble of raccoons or the skitter of pine martens on the roof. No claws clicking, no breath snorting. Just a scrape. Slow and deliberate, once. Then silence. She rose without thinking, joints cracking like frost-kissed limbs. The old floorboards beneath her socks groaned in reply as she stepped toward the door. She didn't call out, didn't flick on the porch light. She just opened it. What stood there was smaller than she expected. Maybe 3.5 feet, hunched low like it was trying to fold in on itself. Its fur, dark brown veined with silvery strands, clung in wet clumps to narrow shoulders. Mud caked its legs. The arms were long, jointed wrong for any deer or bear cub. But it was the face that held her. Not animal, not child. It had a forest wild look, primitive but not savage. There was something heartbreakingly tired in the slope of its brow, the tilt of its head, the way those amber eyes met hers without blinking. There was skin beneath the fur, not thick hide, not leathery snout, but something too close to human. The hair across its face was thin in places, like wind-worn moss. Its mouth was slightly open, as if panting without sound. Its left hand rested flat on the wooden post, as if it had leaned there for balance or maybe trust. Ruth didn't move for a long time. The thing didn't either. Then its knees buckled, and it dropped to the boards with a heavy, exhausted sigh. She could have screamed. Could have slammed the door, fetched the old shotgun under the stairs. But what rose inside her wasn't fear. It was the same kind of ache she'd felt years ago the first time a doe brought her fawn with a broken leg to the edge of her pasture and waited. It was the kind of ache that whispered, You already know what to do. She stepped back. The thing didn't follow. She turned on her heel, crossed the living room, and returned with a dented metal bowl. Filled it from the kitchen sink. Grabbed a clean towel, half a strip of dried venison from the cupboard, and the old green wool blanket folded on the back of her couch. She didn't speak, just set them down on the porch in front of it. Water, food, warmth. Then she stepped back inside and pulled the door to, not all the way. Just enough to leave a slit of safety. She sat on the floor behind the glass, breath shallow, watching. It took 10 minutes for the creature to shift. One long arm reached forward, then another. It didn't crawl so much as drag itself forward with awkward dignity, like its limbs didn't all want the same thing. It dipped its head to sniff the water, then drank. Not like a dog, more like a tired man on his knees, then the meat. It chewed slow, like it was figuring out how, and then the blanket. It pawed at it once, then twice, before curling into a tight shape right there on the boards. The cloth crumpled beneath its head. Ruth stayed there for the rest of the night. Knees drawn up, back against the doorframe, hands tucked under her arms. She didn't sleep. The sky peeled open above the trees by inches, purple to steel, blue to silver. Birds began their morning rituals. Something barked once from deep in the ravine. Wind stirred the fog like a hand dragging fingers through a pond. Ruth opened the door. The creature didn't move, though its breathing had slowed. It was still asleep, if sleep was what that was. She stepped over it, careful not to let her shadow fall across its eyes. The boards creaked, and still it didn't flinch. But her breath caught in her throat when she reached the steps. Just beyond the bottom stair, pressed into the soft mud, was a footprint. Not the creature's, too large, far too large. Maybe 17 inches from heel to toe. The arch deep. Toes splayed like a barefoot man twice her size had stood there, unmoving through the night rain. Ruth knelt, touched the edge of the print, still wet. She looked out across the clearing, into the fog-slick timber beyond the creek, and thought, no, knew, someone had been watching. Someone else had waited, had let the little one come forward alone, had not followed. A guardian, or a parent, or something much more ancient. Behind her, the floor creaked again. She turned, slowly, not rising, just twisting to look. The creature had shifted in its sleep, curled tighter, the blanket tucked now across its shoulders. Its breath fogged faint in the chill air. She whispered the only word that came to her. God. But it didn't feel like fear. It felt like being asked a question in a language she almost remembered. She stood, bones stiff, and walked the perimeter of the cabin, eyes scanning the brush line. The forest stood still. Later that morning, she moved the blanket back inside and washed the bowl. Left another strip of meat on a clean plate on the porch. She didn't try to name it. Not yet. By the time the sun reached the treetops, the creature was gone. But the meat was gone too, and beside the plate was a single stone, smooth, round, mossy on one side, set deliberately in the center, like someone leaving a coin for a service rendered. That night, Ruth sat by the window instead of the porch. She turned off the lights early, let the dark wrap the cabin like a coat, and watched the trees sway gently in the hush between wind and memory. And when the scrape came again, softer this time, she didn't flinch. She rose. She opened the door. It was there, hunched once more in the same place, hands muddy, shoulders damp from fog. This time she didn't go back inside right away. She stayed beside it, not touching, just near. Long enough to see its eyes close, long enough to hear the faintest sound from the trees across the clearing. Not movement, not breath, but presence. There were no words in the air, just knowing, and the quiet scrape of something ancient returning. The first snow fell like it had been waiting all year to return. Quiet, deliberate, slow enough to blanket the roof in a soft hush by morning. Ruth Calder woke to that silence. Not the kind that soothed, but the kind that carried weight, the kind that held breath. Her bones knew it before her mind caught up. She moved slower that day, her steps muffled in thick socks, her hands stiff as she lit the stove, boiled water, watched steam rise like memory off the kettle. Something in her had shifted since that night on the porch. She still hadn't said its name aloud, not even to herself. But she had begun to expect the scrape, that quiet little drag of presence, like a question waiting to be asked again. Yet this morning, there was nothing. No bowl emptied, no blanket dragged, no stone left behind. Just snow, unbroken across the boards. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up. Clouds gray like ash moved through the pines, and a pickup truck crunched its way up her long, rutted drive. The sound reached her before the sight. She squinted through the front window, mug of tea in hand, as the door swung open. Ben Hollis stepped out, taller than she remembered, though maybe it was just the parka. 42 now, still lean from years in the forest, boots already caked with wet snow. He stood there a moment like he wasn't sure if he should knock. Ruth opened the door before he made up his mind. "You always had timing," she said. Ben offered a half smile, more out of politeness than warmth. "Heard some talk down in Glide," he said. "You all right out here?" Ruth stepped aside to let him in. He moved like he was taking inventory, glancing at the shelves, the windows, the door frame. They'd known each other back when she still did field rescue work, before his uniform had patches and her hair had silver. He'd looked up to her once, before life had taken both of them in separate directions. Now they stood in the same kitchen like old tools rediscovered in the shed. "There's a lot of chatter," he continued. "Hunter out near the ridge swore he saw something on 2 legs, not a man. Kid at the gas station says he heard screams in the trees. You know how stories grow." Ruth didn't answer right away. She poured him tea. He didn't ask for it. "You ever see a bobcat bring her kit down to a porch?" she asked finally. Ben raised a brow. "You feeding something?" "Not exactly." He didn't press, but he didn't need to. She saw it in the way he looked at the boots by the door. One was smaller, darker, still crusted with dried mud. Not hers, not his. "Listen," he said after a long pause. "If it's feral, maybe injured, maybe confused, you can't keep it here. I'm not trying to be the bad guy. But the regs are clear. Any wild hybrid or undocumented species gets turned in. For observation, for safety." Ruth's hands tightened on the rim of the mug. "What if it's not confused?" she asked quietly. "What if it knew to come here?" Ben didn't have an answer. Just a look like something behind his eyes was fighting not to soften. "I can call the Roseburg Center," he offered. "They've got holding pens, proper vets. Might be better than risking some yahoo trying to shoot it." Might be, but Ruth didn't say so. By dusk, the creature hadn't come back. Snow deepened in the gully past the barn. Ben helped her load a crate in the truck bed, lined it with a blanket, left a strip of meat just inside. Ruth didn't watch as he coaxed it, didn't want to see it hesitate. She stood with arms crossed while Ben spoke soft words to something too wild to understand him. Eventually it climbed into the crate. No rope, no force, just something in the way it looked at Ruth, like a child sent away for its own good, like it knew. When the truck pulled out, taillights blinked red through the snow. Ruth didn't go back inside for a long time. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her chair, quilt across her knees, fire dying slow in the hearth. Every creak of wind felt like footsteps. Every gust against the pane a breath held too long. The house felt hollow. When the sky lightened, she rose. Her feet were bare on the cold wood when she opened the door. And there it was, crumbled in a heap on the top step. Its legs were streaked with blood, feet torn raw across heel and toe. Its breath came thin, fast. Its fur was stiff with frost, mud crusted beneath one eye. And yet it had made it back, crawled miles over snow-covered woods, dragged itself home. Ruth dropped to her knees. "God, Harbor," she whispered, and the name just came like it had always been there. floating in the silence, waiting to be caught. She didn't move him. Just placed her palm against his side, felt the thrum of his ribs under matted fur. He didn't flinch. By the time the sun rose over the treetops, she had him wrapped in towels, a bowl of warm broth beside him, antiseptic dabbed gently on his wounds. She didn't care who saw, didn't care what law she might be breaking. Ben arrived before noon. He stood in the doorway a long time before stepping inside. His jaw tightened at the sight of the creature lying curled near the hearth, eyes half closed, breath shallow. "He came back," he said quietly. Ruth nodded. "Through snow, with no shoes, no map, no reason to trust me." Ben walked closer, crouched down just far enough to see the damage. Harbor didn't look at him, just stayed still. "You think he understood where you were taking him?" Ruth asked. "I don't know." Ben reached out, paused mid-air, then let his hand drop to his knee. "If you're going to help him," he said slowly, "you can't do it like a pet or a patient. You have to do it in a way the forest would understand." Ruth turned to face him. "And what does that mean?" Ben didn't answer right away. "It means we don't cage him. We don't teach him to sit or beg or sleep in a bed. It means we help him learn to live out there again, not in here. If we're lucky, he forgets our name someday. If we're really lucky, he doesn't need us anymore." The words landed heavy, but Ruth nodded. That evening they made a pact. No one else would know. No officials, no news, no reports. Harbor would stay. For now, but only if he chose to, and only if the forest agreed. They moved him back to the porch that night, bundled in the blanket he'd returned to, left a low tray of food, a shallow bowl of water. Ruth sat inside with the light off, just the faint flicker of the fire dancing on the walls. Snow fell again, soft, unyielding. By midnight, Harbor was asleep. By morning, the bowl was empty, but he was still there. The prints from the night before, the ones that had brought him here bleeding and near collapse, were filled with fresh snow, erased. But just beyond the edge of the clearing, where the trees began again, a shape lingered, too tall, too still, watching, not threatening, not gone. The forest knew, it always did, and it was waiting to see what came next. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold hadn't let go. By January, Gray Hollow shrank into itself under ice and silence, the kind of deep winter where you learn to live slow. Water froze in the pipes if you weren't careful. Trees cracked from the weight of frost. The creek barely moved, whispering beneath a skin of clear ice like it didn't want to be found. Ruth Calder moved through it with the same patience she used to have with feral calves. Hands steady, breath soft, nothing wasted. Her cabin stood like a ship in still water, and somewhere just beyond its edge, something wild was learning how to stay close without forgetting how to be free. They didn't speak about rules at first, but they lived them. That mattered more. 3 unspoken lines drawn in the frost. The first, food was always left outside, never handed, never forced. A ceramic dish, blue-rimmed and shallow, sat each evening on the edge of the porch, filled with cooked scraps or a slice of trout if Ben had been by. It was never empty for long. The second, Ruth never reached for him. Not when he stared at her through the window. Not when his breath fogged the pain and his knuckles tapped once, light as a memory. If Harbor pulled back, she stepped away. That was the deal. The third rule took longer to learn, but it stuck. Whatever happened between them, it had to make him stronger in the wild, not weaker. Each morning brought the same ritual. She'd step out wrapped in her long green coat, boots crunching snow. The forest pressed in like it was listening. Some days she'd find the dish licked clean. Other days it would be gone entirely, replaced with pine cones or feathers or smooth stones. Little things. Gifts, maybe. Messages. She never asked for meaning. Some languages weren't meant to be translated. Harbor began watching her more often. Not always close. Sometimes just a silhouette in the trees. His shape was still small but stronger now, legs steadier, arms less shaky. He moved like he was learning how to be quiet without disappearing. He started mimicking her, hands under the pump spout to feel water, crouching near the fire pit but not touching. She saw him once trying to open the cabin door, only to stop and sit beside it, like he understood that whatever waited inside wasn't his world. Not yet. One night the rain returned, soft and steady, melting the edge of snowbanks and waking up the dirt beneath. Ruth heard the tap on the window around midnight and rose from bed without turning on the light. Outside, Harbor stood at the edge of the porch, shoulders hunched, rain sliding down his fur in thin rivulets. At his feet, something small fluttered, a bird. Ruth stepped into the doorway and froze. It was a fledgling, wet, trembling, wing bent sharp and wrong. Harbor stepped back. Not far, just enough to let her kneel. She gathered the bird in her hands, barely breathing. It weighed nothing. Bones like dried grass, skin warm but fading. She could feel the break. A clean snap high along the humerus. Not hopeless, but it would take days, maybe weeks. She didn't look up until the porch was empty, but she knew he was still near, somewhere in the trees, watching. The bird, some kind of young robin, survived the night. Ruth kept it in a box lined with cloth, warmed by a mason jar filled with hot water. She worked quietly, the way she always did with broken things. No rush, just presence. And Harbor came every night after that. He didn't come close, didn't make a sound. But she felt him. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late evening. Fire crackled in the stove. The robin chirped for the first time, wings twitching under its wrap of gauze. Ruth smiled, sat back, felt the warmth rise in her chest. Then a shadow passed by the window. Tall, still, not Harbor. It didn't move like him. Didn't carry hesitation. It stood deeper in the dark, just far enough away that the porch light didn't catch its face, but close enough to see the width of its shoulders, the height, easily over 8 feet. Its arms hung long, palms visible even in the dim. Then one hand moved. It pressed to its chest, fingers spread, and bowed. Not deep, just enough. Then it turned, stepped into the rain-slicked trees. Gone. Ruth didn't sleep that night. She sat beside the fire, hands around her mug, the robin in its box, the silence in her chest growing louder. In the morning she didn't speak of it to Ben, but he saw something in her face when he came by with extra bandages and a bag of trout. He didn't ask. He just helped her hang the food out in the shed, the way they always did, and left quietly. The robin healed, slowly. Feathers came back glossy. The wing reset. One morning, Ruth left the lid open. That evening, it was gone. 2 nights later, she stepped outside after dark and found a new stone on the porch. Pale green, smooth like glass, set in the exact center of the step. She didn't touch it, just sat beside it, her back to the door, and let the silence stretch. Harbor came closer after that. Not every night, not even every week, but enough. One evening, she stepped out and found him perched beside the empty dish, hands folded like he'd been waiting. She sat down too. He watched her light a lantern, eyes catching the flicker like a child mesmerized. Then he reached forward, slow, and mimicked her, held his hand above the flame, not touching, just sensing. She smiled. He pulled back. They sat that way until the moon came up through the black branches. She spoke then, not expecting him to understand. Just words into the cold. "You're doing fine," she said. "You're learning." Harbor didn't move, but he stayed. The next day brought the wind. It screamed through the trees like something chasing itself, slapping branches against the roof and hurling pine cones down the chimney path. Ruth hunkered inside, lanterns flickering. She wasn't worried. The house had weathered worse, but something felt off. By dusk, the wind died down. She stepped outside to check for damage, and there, lying on the porch, was another offering. A rabbit, not eaten. Legs bound awkwardly in what looked like vine. It had clearly been caught, but not harmed. Not even killed. Its breath came fast, chest fluttering. Harbor stood 10 feet away, motionless. His eyes weren't on her. They were on the woods behind her. She turned, saw nothing, but she felt it. A presence, a pressure, and then a movement between the trunks. Just a flicker, something massive retreating again. Watching, she turned back, knelt, and untied the rabbit. It kicked once, then darted into the woods. Harbor's shoulders dropped like he'd exhaled something heavy. Ruth didn't say anything. She just nodded, and he stepped back into the dark, leaving her alone with the sound of the wind coming back again. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. Not notes, not records, just thoughts. There's a rhythm here, something older than fences, older than science. I think I'm starting to understand it. She closed the book, blew out the lantern, and for the first time since fall, she dreamed not of loss, but of something waiting just ahead, just outside, just beyond the edge of the porch. Spring came like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Snow melted in ribbons down the hill behind Ruth's cabin, and the banks of the Steamboat Creek swelled just enough to make the rocks sing when the water passed. It wasn't loud, not yet, just a quiet burble that reminded her the forest was waking. Shoots of green pushed up through soil that had slept for months, and the trees, wet with mourning, held a light so pale it looked like the world was starting over. Ruth stood on her porch most mornings now, one hand around her coffee, the other resting on the post, eyes scanning the trees where Harbor usually stood. He hadn't been gone exactly, but spring had changed his rhythm. He'd grown leaner, quicker, his legs more sure when he moved across the slope, and his face, though still wild, had lost something of the uncertain curl it once held. He didn't hide as much anymore. He studied. That first week of April, she saw him crouched on the far side of the creek, watching the way she bent down to rinse her hands after planting onions. She didn't call out, just kept working, making the motion slow and wide so he could see. Later that week, she caught him standing at the edge of the fence, his hands cupped, mimicking the way she'd held water. His timing was uncanny. He always appeared just when she wasn't expecting him, like part of the air thickened into him, then faded when he left. And she had stopped trying to follow where he went. Ruth had taken to walking further into the woods than before, not out of worry, but because spring had a way of loosening grief that winter kept frozen. Her boots cut soft paths through the underbrush, and more than once she spotted Harbor's prints alongside her own. Large for his size now, almost too large. He was catching up to her, height-wise. Still lanky, still quiet, but his arms had filled out, his shoulders broadening with the kind of strength that didn't come from lifting things but from belonging to a world where you had to climb and swing and crawl just to eat. It was Ben who said it first. "Another year and he'll be able to carry you over that creek without breaking stride." They sat near the woodshed, splitting kindling. Ruth smirked. "He'd leave me behind. I'm too slow for that kind of rescue." Ben glanced toward the trees. "You think he remembers what we did? That we took him out, then let him come back?" "I think he remembers everything. That was the first time Ruth called him by name in front of someone else. Harbor." Ben didn't flinch when he heard it. "He's watching us every day," Ben said. "Learning, testing." Ruth nodded. "So let's give him something to learn." That spring she started playing, not the way children do, but something quieter, older. She let her hands run along the bark of trees just to feel texture. She crouched to smell the ferns, let the rain catch her palms like prayers. She walked barefoot across fallen logs, arms out. Not for balance, but for the ritual of it. Sometimes Harbor mimicked her movements in perfect silence. Sometimes he added something of his own, a gesture, a rock rolled just so, a leaf pressed into the mud like a signpost. They didn't speak, but they played. Once, after a hard rain, she watched him crawl under a fallen branch near the clearing and emerge grinning. If that was what that expression was. His eyes shone, his shoulders shook with silent joy. Then he pointed, crude but clear, and Ruth followed him to a hill of slick moss where the sun hit just right. There, he showed her how to slide down on her coat like a child would, knees bent, arms loose. She laughed until her breath gave out. Her coat tore in the back, but she didn't care. That night she found a pine cone tucked onto the porch rail. She took it as his way of saying, "We're not that different." She never forgot that morning with Maya Dalton. The girl came by once a week with her grandmother's baking. Not for charity, just to check on Ruth. At 13, Maya had the kind of eyes that didn't wander. She saw things, even when you didn't want her to. Her parents had died 2 years back, drunk driver in a pickup just past Deer Ridge. And since then, she'd lived with her grandma in the old house past the tracks. She'd taken to leaving warm cornbread or biscuits wrapped in cloth on the fence line and whistling as she walked away. Said it was for the foxes. That morning, Ruth had just stepped out with coffee when she saw Harbor, crouched behind the shed, eyes locked on the fence. Maya stood just beyond, waiting to see if anything came. The breeze shifted. Harbor didn't move. Then, slowly, almost too slowly to notice, he stood. Ruth tensed but said nothing. Maya looked up. Her lips parted just a little. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She smiled. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she turned, walked away, and left the biscuits where they were. Harbor didn't touch them. Not that day. Ruth found him hours later, still watching the fence. That night she wrote down, "He knows respect." As the weeks passed, little signs began appearing. Rabbit fur caught on the edge of her garden, the kind that looked like it had been laid there, not scattered by prey. Scratches on the trees, always chest high, fresh. And once, a swirl of flattened leaves under the cedar by the creek, like something had nested there. Harbor was building patterns, places, habits. She didn't disturb them. Hank Brewer noticed it too. He came every Thursday, truck rumbling low, the door never slammed. A quiet man with a face that hadn't changed much since the 80s, still wore a flannel-like armor. His wife had passed the year before, and since then, his mail runs had grown slower, longer, like he didn't want to go home too soon. He never asked about Harbor. But once, after handing Ruth a package, he paused. "You seen the tracks behind your smokehouse?" She nodded. "Every morning." He tipped his cap, eyes steady. "Some things don't belong in the papers." She never forgot that. One morning in late May, the creek rose with meltwater, churning brown and loud. Ruth stepped onto the porch and froze. There, on the bottom step, was a streak of mud shaped like a hand. Long fingers, broad palm, smeared down like someone had caught themselves mid-fall. Still wet. She followed the marks and found Harbor waiting at the edge of the yard, breathing hard, holding something limp. A rabbit, its leg mangled. He placed it down, stepped back. Ruth crouched low, examining the trap still clamped around the rabbit's ankle. Old rusted metal, sharp. Someone had set it close. Too close. She pried it open. The rabbit kicked once, then sagged. She didn't say a word. But Harbor stood very still, eyes locked on the rabbit, not her. That night, Ben came by with news. Found fur up a tree trunk off Old Washburn Road, caught high, too high for a cougar. Ruth looked up from where she was rubbing ointment on the rabbit's wound. How high? 8 feet at least, fresh. She said nothing. Ben set his hat on the table. Something's keeping watch near here, bigger than him. You think it's the same one from before? Ruth met his gaze. I don't think he's alone anymore. I think they're letting me see pieces. Ben nodded slow. That means they trust you. She shook her head. No, it means they're watching if I'm worthy. That night, After the house had gone quiet and the wind laid still, Ruth sat by the window with the rabbit resting in a box beside her. Harbor hadn't come. Not that she expected him, but she still left a bowl outside, and when she woke just before dawn, it was gone. In its place was something new, a tuft of fur, not Harbor's, longer, coarser, and laid neatly across a bent pine bough, like someone had combed it out and left it behind. Ruth stepped into the wet grass barefoot, held it in her palm. She didn't cry. Not quite. But something in her chest shifted, like a page turning to a part of the story she hadn't read before. She didn't know the words yet, but she was starting to understand the grammar. And out there, just beyond the fence, someone was waiting for her to answer. Summer came in fast and dry, the way it always did in this part of Oregon. By June, the soft meltwater of spring had thinned to a whisper, and the air in Gray Hollow turned thick with heat and pollen. Dust clung to boots, to leaves, to skin. It coated the porch rails and turned every breeze into a hot breath. Ruth felt it in her chest like a weight, the kind that pressed down but never quite settled. Something in the woods had shifted again, and not just the weather. Harbor was growing, and growing fast. One morning she stepped onto the porch and caught sight of him crouched beside the wood shed. The shape of him startled her. Broad shoulders, longer limbs. His head nearly level with the window now. When he stood, he was almost her height. Maybe more. His posture had changed too. Less childlike, less uncertain. He didn't just watch her anymore. He studied her, mirrored her, moved like he had his own intentions, not just borrowed ones. That day she left a canteen by the fence line. When she came back, it was gone, but the cap had been twisted back on. Tight, thoughtful, a small thing, but it made her heart catch in her throat. Then came the night he crossed the line. She'd been up late sorting through old records, paperwork from when she used to work with the Wildlife Center, notes from her days tracking bear movement near Diamond Lake. The windows were open to let in what little breeze the night had left. Crickets loud in the distance. Then the floor creaked behind her. Not outside, inside. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway like he didn't know if he was allowed. His chest rose and fell with quick, uneven breaths. His fur was damp, clinging to him from the heat or from something else she couldn't place. His eyes were wide, not afraid exactly, but searching. His hand lifted slightly, fingers brushing the edge of the green jacket she kept draped over the back of the chair. Her coat, the one she wore on early walks and misty mornings. He touched it like it meant something, like it was part of her. She didn't speak, didn't reach for him. She just stepped back, slowly, and opened the door behind him. Held it there, let the air speak for her. Outside. That's your place now. He didn't fight it, but he didn't leave right away either. He stood in the middle of her living room, eyes lingering on the old photos along the mantel, the books, the firewood stacked neat beside the hearth. Then he turned, walked out. No sound, no shame. And for 2 days, he was gone. Ruth searched without looking like she was searching, walked longer loops near the river, left food but not too close to the house, waited with her chest tight and her voice buried under thoughts she didn't want to name. Then she found him, near the bend in the creek where the moss grew thickest. He wasn't hurt, but he wasn't whole either. He sat with his back to a tree, knees pulled up, eyes locked on a deer carcass laid out in front of him. A young one, probably starved or slipped in the current. Flies already thick around its mouth. Harbor didn't touch it, just sat there, watching, learning. She didn't go to him, just stood on the other side of the clearing, arms crossed, watching him watch death. There was a lesson in it, one he was trying to take in, and she knew better than to interrupt. That night she couldn't sleep again. Too much weight behind her eyes. Too many signs stacking up like stones in a riverbed. Word had spread in town, not specific, just mutterings, glimpses. A creature, a shadow, something big. Out past Ridgeline, down near Walker's Gulch. People always talk more when they're afraid. and fear makes them loud. The next morning, Earl Nix showed up at the diner. Boots loud on the tile, voice louder. Claimed he saw something near the old logging trail. Said it wasn't a bear. Said it wasn't natural. He'd been a hunter since before most kids in Glide could spell it. Mean streak wide as the valley. Long memory, short patience. He used to run dogs up the ridge with his brother till the accident. Never forgot what clawed up their meat smoker 2 summers back. Swore something big with hands did it. Ben came by the cabin that evening, his face drawn tight. You need to be careful, he said. People are stirring. Ruth leaned against the door frame, arms folded. They always stir, she said. Ben nodded. Yeah, but this time they're pointing fingers. She looked out toward the tree line, toward the place Harbor hadn't returned from yet. If they see him, Ben added, they'll call it a monster. I know. And if they catch him, they won't. Ben watched her for a long moment, then stepped down off the porch and left without another word. That night the air turned still. No bugs, no wind, just the sound of her own breath and the weight of knowing something was coming. When Harbor did return, it was just before dawn. He didn't step out of the trees. He didn't try the porch. She found him curled near the smokehouse, pressed against the cool soil, his back bleeding from a long, fresh gash. Not deep but angry, his breathing shallow. She didn't speak, just knelt. Reached for the first aid kit she kept stashed beneath the bench. He didn't pull away, didn't flinch. Let her wipe the blood with a warm cloth, her hand steady even though her jaw clenched so tight she thought it might crack. The scratch ran from shoulder to hip, like something had swiped at him. A branch wouldn't leave a mark like that, but a trap might, or a man with a blade. She didn't ask, didn't need to. When she was done, she sat beside him until the sun crested the ridge. He didn't move. But when she finally stood, he reached for her coat again, held it just a second, then let it go. The message was clear. I was close. I shouldn't have been. But I needed to know if I still mattered. She didn't speak the answer, just brushed her knuckles against the back of his hand. A silent yes. That same day she found the tracks. Not Harbor's, bigger, wider. Pressed deep into the ground behind the chicken coop, right at the edge of the garden. Someone had been here. Someone had followed. She stood over them with her hands in her pockets and her jaw tight. Then she looked up, into the trees, into the place where Harbor always disappeared, and whispered, "You're not alone, are you?" She knew then. The watchers weren't just watching him anymore. They were watching her too. That night she left no food, no water, just light. The porch lamp glowed soft into the dark, a signal, a prayer. And out there something moved but didn't step forward. Just listened, just waited. Like it had all summer, like it had for years. The first thunder cracked across the Umpqua sky like a bone snapping in the hands of something angry. It rolled down the ridges and through the hollows, rattling the windows of Ruth Calder's cabin before she even made it to the door. The wind had turned that day, late August, pressing down like a fever. But the heat didn't break until after dark, when the clouds finally opened and the storm made landfall. Not rain. No, not yet. Just sound and pressure, the air drawn tight like a drumhead, ready to split. Ruth had known storms before, but this one came with something else tucked inside it. A presence, a warning. She could feel it in her ribs. She and Ben had spent the afternoon boarding up the chicken coop, tying down the wood pile, checking the generator just in case. It wasn't often the wind got strong enough to tear tin from the roof, but it had happened once, back in '86, and Ruth didn't want to tempt fate. She was older now. The house was older too, and something in the way the trees were moving told her this wasn't just a summer tantrum. This was a reckoning. The sky turned green by 5. By 6, it was the color of old bruises. Branches clawed at the cabin like they were trying to get in. The creek had risen fast, too fast, and when the first gust slammed against the side of the house hard enough to rattle the cabinets, Ruth stepped away from the window and reached for the lanterns. Ben stood by the door, jaw tight, watching the tree line through a crack in the boards. Then came the knock. Not at the door, at the edge of the porch. 3 short taps, and Ruth knew. She unlatched the door slowly, let it swing open just enough for the wind to scream past her face. And there, standing like he'd stepped out of the storm itself, was Harbor. He was bigger now, much bigger. Nearly filled the space between post and beam. Fur slick with rain, dripping off his arms like runoff from a rooftop. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were the same, amber, steady, afraid, but not for himself. Behind him, lightning lit the ridge, and in the flash, Ruth saw what she hadn't wanted to believe was coming. Earl Nix, 30 yards out, rifle slung low, moving fast through the rain like it wasn't even there. Ben was already moving before Ruth spoke. He grabbed his coat, reached for the old deer horn knife he kept behind the stove, and stepped into the storm without hesitation. Ruth turned to Harbor. "Inside," she said, barely audible over the wind. But he didn't move, didn't cross the line. He turned instead, faced the clearing, and raised his arms, wide, blocking the house, a wall of wet fur and muscle, protecting her. Lightning split the sky again, and this time, the crack of the rifle followed right after. A single shot. Ruth screamed, but Harbor didn't fall. He staggered. One step, then righted himself. Ben's shout tore through the trees. There was a scuffle. Boots in mud, metal hitting dirt, a grunt, then silence. Ruth ran out into the yard. Her feet slapped wet grass, her nightgown whipping around her knees like a sail. She found Ben crouched in the mud, one knee pressing into Earl's chest, the rifle flung 10 feet away. Earl's hat was gone, his eyes wild, foam at the corners of his mouth. "You don't know what that thing is," he screamed. "It's watching us." Ben didn't respond, didn't move, just stared. Earl struggled once, then stopped, deflated. Somewhere behind them, Harbor disappeared into the trees. Ruth looked after him, rain coming down now in sheets, thunder chasing itself through the peaks. She waited, but he didn't come back. Not that night. The storm roared on. Ruth's roof held, but barely. Water pooled under the back door and soaked the floor. The chimney hissed where the rain found hot ash. She sat on the edge of her bed until sunrise, hands shaking, breath shallow. Ben stayed, sleeping upright in the chair like a dog guarding the front door. When morning finally broke, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like aftermath, like something had been broken, not just in the sky, but between them and the forest. She stepped onto the porch at first light, eyes raw from wind and worry. There was no sound, just the steady drip of rain sliding off the roof. And then she saw it, far down the slope, near the old river birch that had split last spring. Harbor, slumped against the trunk, his shoulders slick with blood, a dark patch on the grass behind him. Ruth didn't call out, didn't rush. She moved slow, deliberate. Ben followed without being asked. Together they reached him, crouched low. His breath was shallow, eyes open but unfocused. He didn't flinch when she touched him, didn't resist when she lifted his arm to check the wound. The bullet had grazed him, high through the muscle. No shattered bone, but deep enough to hurt, deep enough to send a message. "I've got you," she whispered, pressing gauze against the wound, her other hand cradling the back of his neck. "I've got you." He let her. That meant everything. They carried him to the cabin. Didn't drag, didn't force. He walked between them, leaning heavier on Ben than Ruth, but still upright. Pride, maybe, or instinct. They laid him down on the porch under the awning. Blankets, towels, water. She cleaned the wound again. Ben sat nearby watching the trees. The forest didn't make a sound. No birds, no movement, nothing. Until late that evening, when the last light of day slipped behind the ridge and the shadows stretched long across the clearing. Something moved in the distance. A heron, blue-gray, caught in fishing wire, one leg bent at an odd angle. It limped into view, then stopped, dropped to the ground. Ruth froze. So did Ben. Harbor sat up, winced, then reached out, pulled the bird close, cradled it like he'd seen her do 100 times, then looked at her and let it go, back into her hands. A gift, a sign, an apology, or maybe a question. Ruth worked quietly, clipping the wire, checking for damage. The bird's heart beat fast beneath her fingers, but it didn't try to flee. When she finished, she looked up. But Harbor was gone again. Only a faint smear of blood on the porch remained. A trace, a memory. And above it, in the beam of the porch light, one word hung in the air, unspoken. Forgive. Ruth sat down on the top step, her hands trembling around the bird. Rain started again, light, gentle. Ben tore the report in half without a word. Pages soaked through in seconds. He let the pieces drift into the grass. Neither of them said a thing. They didn't need to. The forest had already answered. Not in words, but in what it left behind and what it spared. The forest turned red before it turned gold. That was how Ruth always remembered the start of fall, like a breath of fire across the ridgeline. By the second week of October, the canopy above Gray Hollow burned with color, every maple and birch catching flame in the wind before letting go. Mornings came sharp, frost blooming in the grass like ghost prints. Ruth's porch steps creaked in a different tone now, stiffer wood under colder skies. Her breath showed in the mornings. So did the thin steam from her coffee cup. She was 60 now, though that number didn't hold the weight it used to. Some mornings her back reminded her. Other mornings it was her hands. But mostly it was her eyes. How long they stayed fixed on the tree line without blinking. It had been over a month since the storm. Harbor hadn't returned right away. She knew better than to expect him on a schedule. He came like weather, when he was ready. But this time felt different. Not gone, exactly. Just farther. Like something in him had decided it was time to step back from the firelight and into the woods again. He was still out there. She felt that in her bones. And then, just as October reached its peak and the wind began shaking loose the last stubborn leaves, he came back. But not alone. She heard them first. 2 sets of steps. Soft but heavy, moving through the carpet of damp leaves beyond the fence. She stood up slowly from the porch swing, the mug warm in her palms, heart thudding once, hard. And then she saw him. Harbor, taller now, easily 9 feet, his shoulders wider than the doorway he used to crouch beside. His fur had thickened for the cold, deep brown shot through with silver. He moved like he had weight he was used to carrying now, like he belonged to the land in a way he hadn't before. And beside him, half a step behind, was another figure, slightly shorter, leaner in the limbs, still massive by human measure but graceful. Female. Her fur was darker, almost black in the low light, and she kept her gaze down until they reached the edge of the clearing. Then she lifted her face. Ruth didn't breathe. It was her eyes that spoke. They weren't wild, not the way people imagined. They were focused, careful, measured, like someone used to being misunderstood. Harbor raised one hand. Not to wave, just to place it gently against his chest, then lower it again. A gesture she remembered. He stepped forward, slow. Then he knelt. Gently, he laid something at the edge of the porch. An animal, not torn, not dead. A young deer, its leg twisted unnaturally. Alive. Scared. He backed away. The female stayed where she was, standing just at the edge of the trees, her arms loose at her sides, her breath visible in the cold air. Ruth knelt by the fawn, hands steady. Its leg was broken but not shattered. She whispered to it, the way she always had. It didn't try to run. She worked slow, binding the leg with strips of flannel and a willow splint. When she looked up again, Harbor was closer, watching. The female had stepped forward too, just enough to be touched by the porch light, her expression unreadable, but not empty. When Ruth finished, she sat back on her heels, waited. Harbor moved first. He approached her, not as the boy she remembered, but something else now. He stopped just a few feet away, then bent down slowly, lowering his massive frame until his forehead touched the top of her knee. Just for a moment, the world held still. A kind of gravity passed between them, ancient, gentle, permanent. He stood again, turned. The female brushed her fingers along his arm as he passed. Then they disappeared into the trees. Ruth sat for a long time with her hand resting on the deer's flank, its breath soft against her wrist. The night settled deep around her, and from a distance, just before the forest swallowed them whole, she heard a call, low, melodic, like something between a whistle and a hum. It wasn't Harbor. It was her, the female, speaking without words. And Ruth understood. She slept that night in the chair by the window, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the porch lamp left on, just in case. In the morning, something strange waited for her outside. The ground in front of the cabin, usually scattered with leaves and pine needles, had been swept clean. Not cleared like a broom would do, but carefully brushed in an arc, like a wide crescent from the base of the steps out into the clearing. A path, inviting, protective. She stepped into it barefoot, the cold, damp earth pressing up through her skin, her robe trailing along the ground. No words, no message, just gesture from the woods, for her. Ben came by that afternoon. He parked the truck without honking, carried in a bundle of split oak for the fire. When he saw the arc in the leaves, he said nothing, just stood beside her. They both watched the tree line for a while. "He's different," Ben said finally. "Older," Ruth nodded. "Wasn't just him, was it?" Ruth shook her head. Ben exhaled slow through his nose. "Then it means something that they came back here." She nodded again. Ben reached up, took off his cap, pressed it against his chest. A quiet gesture, a witness. That night Ruth sat by the fawn again. It didn't cry. It didn't panic. It simply existed, quiet and mending. Harbor had learned that from her. And now he was teaching someone else. Later, when the moon rose full and white over the eastern ridge, she heard them again, 2 sets of steps, just out of sight. Not coming closer, just circling, guarding. Not her, the fawn. She let herself cry then, not out of grief, but something else. A release, the kind that only comes when you know for certain that what you gave is being carried forward. At dawn, the wind shifted again, carried the scent of cedar and cold water. A thin fog rose from the forest floor and clung low to the moss. The fawn stood, wobbled, then walked. Not far, but enough. Ruth didn't stop it. She watched as it limped slowly into the trees, unafraid. Somewhere beyond the mist, a shadow waited. Large, silent. Ruth turned back toward the porch, her eyes misted, her lips parted like a prayer that hadn't found the words yet. She stepped up the cleaned path, each step lighter than the last. The world was quiet, but not empty. And behind her, deep in the trees, something large moved alongside the fawn. Not touching, not hurting, just near. And that was enough. The porch creaked behind her. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She simply whispered, "Thank you." And the wind answered softly through the branches like it understood. Winter returned quiet that year. No grand announcement, no storm at its heels, just a slow fading of color, like someone dimmed the world a little at a time. Frost came first, collecting on porch rails and the corners of windows. Then the chill set in under the floorboards, the kind that crept up your spine no matter how many layers you wore. But Ruth Calder wasn't afraid of winter. Not anymore. She knew what came with it. Stillness, yes, but not emptiness. There was a life here, if you knew how to listen for it. Sometimes in the scratch of a crow's wing across the sky, sometimes in the faint scrape on wood before dawn, sometimes in nothing at all, which meant even more. She'd turned the porch into a place of care. Not officially, not with any sign or permission, just a blanket folded in a basket, a chipped white bowl by the step, warm towels stacked in the crate by the back door. Over time, it had become a rhythm, not a ritual. Animals came without needing coaxing. Wounded jays, lost kits, once even a fox with a torn ear. They never lingered long, but they came, and she helped. It was enough. Maya Dalton came more often now, 15 and sharp-eyed, tall for her age, with a quiet way about her that made animals slow down when she was near. She never touched unless asked, never spoke loud. Ruth had taught her that without words. These days, Maya handled most of the morning rounds, checking the trap-free zones, sweeping out the storage crates, changing the bandages on the one-eyed barn owl they called Marble. She never asked about Harbor, but she looked toward the trees when she thought Ruth wasn't watching. That was enough. Hank Brewer still delivered mail every Thursday. Always with the same gentle nod, the same quiet knock, just once, on the side of the screen door, even if he saw Ruth standing right there. Habit now. A gesture with no weight, and yet full of meaning. The kind of hello you don't have to answer out loud. December came with a pale sun and hard ground. The sky hung low, like it hadn't woken up properly. Ruth kept the fire going most nights, not for heat, though it helped, but for company. She liked the sound of it, the way it breathed, the way it reminded her of Harbor's slow exhale when he used to sit just outside the light. She hadn't seen him since that night in October. Not fully, but she'd felt him. Some mornings, there'd be a single leaf left on the step. Not a fresh one, but dried, brittle, always curled inward. Some mornings it was a stone. Once, it was a pine needle laid perfectly across her doormat. Never two, never more. She understood. He was still near, just not near enough to see. She let him be. And then, one morning in late January, she opened the door before sunrise and found nothing. No stone, no leaf, no bowl moved, no warmth. She stood there barefoot in the cold air, her hand resting on the door frame like it might hold her up. The silence wasn't unusual, but it felt final, not cruel, just full, like something had closed gently. She whispered his name, not loud, just enough. Harbor. Nothing answered. No breeze, no breath. She stepped back inside and closed the door, her fingers trembling just a little as they turned the lock. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even sadness. It was something older, a knowing. That day passed without sound. So did the next. Then the next. Ruth said nothing. To Maya. To Ben. To herself. Some things you don't name out loud, but you carry them anyway. By early February, the ground had frozen deep. The stream moved slower, almost like it was tired of running. Ruth spent her mornings by the hearth, sewing a new quilt from strips of old ranger uniforms and flannel shirts. Her fingers knew what to do, even when her mind drifted. Maya came in one Saturday, cheeks red from the wind, and knelt beside the fireplace. Something was watching today, she said, voice low. Ruth didn't look up. Could have been a deer, Maya added, but it wasn't moving like one. Ruth nodded. That's good, she said. That was all. And it was. One morning in late winter, Ruth stepped out just before dawn. The sky was soft gray, the kind of color that holds light without letting it go. She wore her oldest sweater, the one Harbor once tried to drag across the yard when it smelled too much like wood smoke. The porch boards groaned under her steps. There was nothing waiting for her. No gift, no track, no sound. But as she turned to go back inside, something made her pause. The doorframe, the lowest panel, right where the wood had worn smooth from years of weather and hands and time. There, just above the step, was the faintest print. A smear, really. But the shape was right. Large palm, long fingers. Pressed just once, long ago maybe or maybe not. She crouched, ran her hand across it. The wood was dry, but warm. She pressed her own palm over the mark and whispered, I'm still here. And that was when she heard it. Far off, deep in the trees. A sound like a branch bending, not breaking, then settling, and then silence again. But it wasn't empty this time. Not anymore. The weeks that followed felt gentler. Birds returned early. A fox kit pawed at the back of the smokehouse one morning, curious but not hungry. Ruth found a woven bundle of moss tucked into the crook of her fence post. Inside was a single crow feather, clean and untouched. She didn't tell anyone, not even Maya. Some things you keep, some things keep you. By the end of March, the thaw had begun in earnest. The path down to the creek softened. The trees shed their crusts of ice. Ruth began planting again, small things at first. Herbs, roots, life that didn't demand too much too soon. She moved slower now, but with purpose. One morning Maya asked, Will he ever come back like before? Ruth wiped her hands on a cloth and looked toward the woods. "He already has," she said. Then, softer, "Just not in the way you mean." That night the wind picked up again, but it didn't howl. It hummed, soft, like a voice through pine needles, or a memory, or a song no one wrote but everyone remembers. At first light, Ruth stepped outside with her hands in her pockets, shoulders loose despite the cold. The trees were still, but something moved behind them. She didn't try to see it, didn't need to. She just listened, and in that quiet, she heard a promise, not of return, not of ending, but of presence, the kind that doesn't leave a shadow, only a trace of warmth where your hand once rested. The kind that says, without saying anything, "I remember you," and Ruth smiled, because she did too. In the end, stories like this aren't really about the forest, or the quiet porches, or the shadows that move just out of sight. They're about what remains long after the moment has passed, about the invisible threads that stretch between one soul and another, even across great silence. They're about the small, wordless gestures of care, a bowl of water left outside, a hand that doesn't reach but waits, a presence that chooses to stay near, even when it's no longer seen. There's something sacred in that kind of connection, something we often forget in a world that moves too fast and speaks too loudly. The truth is, not everything precious needs to be named. Not every bond requires explanation. Some of the most powerful acts of kindness are the ones that go unseen. The most profound good often arrives with no announcement and leaves with no reward. This story reminds us that trust isn't built through words. It's built through patience, through consistency, through the quiet, faithful choice to show up again and again, without asking for anything in return. It reminds us that compassion can be a form of courage, and gentleness a form of strength, and that even the wildest hearts, the ones shaped by wind and instinct and fear, can recognize kindness when it's offered freely. We live in a time where the world often feels divided, uncertain, and distant. But there is still so much that binds us, if we're willing to slow down and listen. If we can learn to meet the unfamiliar not with fear, but with curiosity. If we can hold space for what we don't yet understand. There is dignity in choosing to care, even when no one's watching. There is grace in helping simply because you can. And there is beauty in every quiet moment when something or someone feels safe enough to stay. Maybe that's the point. Not to change the world with grand gestures, but to change one corner of it with quiet love. To be a sanctuary when the rest of the world forgets how to be kind. To carry forward a tenderness that echoes even after we're gone. If this story moved something in you, even just a little, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment, share your reflections, or simply let us know you're out there listening. And if you'd like to be part of more stories like this, filled with meaning, wonder, and heart, don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel. Your presence matters here. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for walking this path with us.